Welcome, everybody, to another Semen Retention Sunday episode here on the Regal Change account. I have with me today the results of the Regal Retention Case Study number 1 that we conducted from April 9th, 2026 to May 9th, 2026. Now, there are going to be 10 subjects that we're going to be looking into. The first 8 have 3 key metrics that we were identifying, whereas the last 2 subjects have all 4 key metrics that we're going to be tracking and identifying. Now, a bit of background about this is that we were observing a sample of males who tracked a variety of characteristics, including, but not really limited to, however, in this study, this is what we were focused on, was the consecutive days of semen retention, the daily levels of energy, daily focus levels, daily moods, urges, urge intensities, sleep patterns, confidence, productivity, distractions, social awareness, discipline, and creativity. And this study investigates exactly how the ancient spiritual practice of semen retention regulates psychophysiology of males. So these were the 4 key metrics that we were looking at. The core metric was, number 1, the consecutive days of semen retention. Number 2 was the psychological and emotional. So this includes the daily moods, the confidence, social awareness, creativity, etc. Number 3 was the cognitive and behavioral, which is the daily focus levels, productivity, distractions, or discipline ratings. Then the last was physiological and biological, which includes daily energy levels, sleep patterns, daily urges, etc. So we had a variety of different types of people that were on many different types of consecutive days of semen retention. And so the method that we wanted to go into with this was having a group of male volunteers who were asked to examine and track their external and internal systems of regulation each day consistently for 30 days. And so this, seeing that it is a case study of multiple dimensions here, we wanted to consider each of these 10 subjects who participated on different consecutive days, seeing that they were all from 0 to 1,400 plus days. There were 2 subjects who tracked different sets of characteristics than the other 8, like I mentioned at the beginning. So here is where we get into the results. So this is subject number 1. And so for these first 8, we're going to be tracking the core, the cognitive and behavioral, and then the physiological and biological. Okay, so pretty much everything except the psychological and emotional are what we're going to be tracking for the first 8 people and the first 8 subjects. So as you can see here, the consecutive days on retention, this person was at 81 days or so by the time we started this. And you can see that this was a pretty consistent overall trajectory. There was a baseline toward about day 100, it seems like, that was pretty steady and low in regard to the urge intensity. And you can see here in the top left-hand corner of this graph, we have the energy levels in yellow, focus levels in blue, and then mood in that purple. So everything kind of tracks alongside everything else. The urge intensity didn't really play a significant factor until about day 99 and 101 here. And you can see as soon as the urge intensity drops off consistently and steadily below a 2 and under, all of a sudden focus level improves, mood improves, energy levels improve, and they're relatively sustained the longer that the urge intensity is reduced. So that's pretty interesting. So, and you can go back through this video and you can pause the video if you want to like look more into the detail. I will be posting this in the Regal Academy so that everybody that wants to go through this data with a fine-tooth comb, they'll be able to do so. And I'm going to give a rough overview of everybody here, and that way you can analyze the data on your own time, of course, as well. So this is subject number 2. Now, this person had several relapses. Each of these big red lines here was a relapse. And this was another thing we wanted to really track for the case study, was that it didn't matter if you relapse or not. What we wanted to know was what happens if they do relapse, and how long does it take for the cognitive and behavioral, or the physiological and biological, to kind of catch up to what it once was before the relapse, because this is a significant thing that you can see steadily. Like, okay, you can see here that the focus level naturally improves drastically after the first 2 relapses, going from a 6 all the way to a 10. Okay. And then as soon as they relapse, bada bing, bada boom, focus levels down to 3. Okay. And it takes a couple of days to kind of go back up, but then, it drops down again. But you can see that the higher the urges, the less focused and the less energy levels that are available for this as well. And it should be noted that these were all people that were doing their best with the tracking. So you can also see here that, again, because they relapsed on certain days, I mean, it's very obvious that the intensity of the urges plays a factor in the tracking as well. And there was a bit of shame that I know that people reached out to me about in regard to the tracking. Like, they didn't really feel like they were, quote unquote, worthy to track this stuff. But nonetheless, it was still a good, like, I don't want people to worry about the shame, because we're going to probably do another case study like this just to get more data, of course, because nobody's ever really done anything like this as far as I know. And so we wanted to do this and spearhead it so that, it can actually be something of real utility for those people out there that are interested in the results. So again, and providing the graphs with you and for you to check out while you're actually in the process, it helps you see just how significant this stuff really is, even with the relapses, right? I mean, you'll see the focus level immediately goes up every single time after the relapse of this individual. Okay, so now we're going to subject 3. Now, this person has a very stable baseline. You can see here that they're on days 450 to 479 by the time that we finish this 30-day trial of the semen retention case study. So obviously a bit more stable. Okay, so you can see here, like, the person who's relapsing all the time, very different in their behaviors. Then we have another person who's, further along for sure in the journey, and they're relatively stable for the most part. There's no relapses or anything, but there is, this psychological internal architecture that's being revised in true time and in real time. But then you have this person who you can kind of see that throughout the study, their urges actually decrease pretty significantly. And you can also see that the urge intensity for this individual is still pretty high. And yet there's still this dedication with the energy levels and the focus levels. So that is very interesting in of itself, because this person's nearly a year and a half into their journey. And so you can see that this person still has urges, okay? But it's what they do with that that is really shifting everything for them, you see. So now we move into subject 4. So subject 4 here, they are on day 12 by the time we start, and they finish up at about day 41 or so. Now you can see here that they had a significant amount of time where the urges kind of decreased, and the more that the urges decreased, the more that their focus and energy levels were increasing. Okay, but then as soon as the urge really peaked around day 27 of the study, and then day 38 or so of the actual consecutive days of this individual, there was a really big friction point right here where the urge was spiking. But then as soon as the urges go back down, focus and energy levels come back up. So we can clearly see in just 4 subjects already that there is a very significant correlation. And of course, in analyzing situations, correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it is very interesting nonetheless. Okay, so now we have another individual who they are on day 12 as well, starting out, and they end up on day 41. And this is a little bit more steady through time. This is a little bit more steady. There's urges there, and the urges are really high, but you can still see, again, around day 26 here for the study, as soon as the urges really increase, and sustain in that increase, because there's only a couple spikes here, but when that sustained increase is there, focus levels drop pretty significantly. But mood kind of follows the focus level, it seems like, for this individual. So that's also something like we have to consider, that this is not just, a one size fits all, but we're also considering the actual individual and what they're going through and how they're going through it all together. So now we have subject 6. So this is where this person actually was able to get their sleep duration and quality tracked as well. So we can see here that with the sleep tracking, because a lot of people have mentioned with semen retention, they get better sleep. A lot of people have mentioned that even though it's better sleep, they get less sleep. A lot of people have, because online, this is like in the semen retention community, you might say, right? This has been something that has repeatedly come up, where the sleep patterns kind of vary just because you have so much freaking energy. But you can see that the more focused the individual is during the day, the better their sleep is at night, or vice versa. The better their sleep is, the more they're focused during the day, which naturally makes sense, obviously. And this person also was on day 11 when they started out, and ended up on day 40 or so by the time they completed the analyzation process and the tracking process. But that's very interesting, right? And of course, this person, you can see like on day 17 here, I mean, the urges weren't insane, but the sleep really wasn't great either, and the focus level wasn't really there either. But as soon as, there's a sustained amount of good sleep, the urges start to increase right before they decrease. So when there's fluctuation in sleep, it looks like there's fluctuation in the urge intensities. And when there's sustained sleep, the urge intensity just remains pretty normal at a baseline, rather, not really normal, but at a baseline. Normal urge intensity kind of depends on the individual from the looks of this data. So like for example, the guy that was at 450 days or so, he had strong urges pretty much every day, but he never did anything about it. Whereas people who are on, let's say day 0 to 30, they definitely have more of a fluctuation in their urges and how they respond to them during the day. So that's pretty interesting. Now we move into subject 7. So this person also was able to track their sleep pattern. And so you can see that the green, I ought to have mentioned this, is the green bar in the background behind the line graphs are actually the sleep quality and the sleep duration. It's the same thing with this subject 7 here. So this green bar is the sleep duration and quality, and that red line is continuing to be the urge intensity. The energy levels is yellow, and then the blue is the focus in this one. So naturally here you can see that the more sleep, the less the urges, and the better the energy level, and the better the focus levels. This person was also on day 116 when they started out on consecutive days. And so it's interesting that there's still that kind of psychological, not barrier, but that fluctuation, that pretty stark fluctuation in how everything is tracked for this individual, right? So this is just the graph without the sleep. So you can kind of see a little bit more clearly that the energy levels and the mood isn't always going to be correspondent with the urge intensity. So for example, the urge intensity here and here was pretty low, and yet their focus level wasn't really too low, considering everything else that they're on, as far as like what they tracked. But their mood drastically changed, anytime there was a major decrease in the urge intensity, which is very interesting, apart from right here at the very end of this tracking. So this is kind of an anomaly as far as what kind of tracking we can really consider from this. There's a lot of there's a lot to work with and a lot to analyze just in this subject alone, but it's very interesting nonetheless to see the dichotomy and the juxtaposition, because this was definitely more of like an outlier per se when it came to the other data sets that we have. Doesn't make it right or wrong necessarily. Again, this is what the data is suggesting. So very interesting. Now we move into subject number 8. So again, the green bar in the graph is the sleep pattern, and the red is the urge intensity, blue is focus level, yellow is energy, and then mood is that purple. So you can clearly see here, this is another great case of, okay, this is a correlation where the urge intensity, the lower it is, the higher the energy level, focus level, and mood. And then you can see as soon as the urges went up right about here, went from energy level being a 9 to a 5 in about 1, 2, 3, 4 days. And so then, because the energy level, the urge intensity persisted for a couple of days. So this actually is pretty interesting, because the more the duration of the days are concerned, the urge intensity in those days, the higher it is for the longer, the more challenging it is for the psychological condition in the psyche of the male. But when it's sustained at a lower urge intensity, this is something we see consistently throughout the data. When there's low urge intensities, high energy, focus, and mood. That's consistent pretty much across everybody except for that subject 7. Now we get to subject 9. Now, this is where we tracked for this individual focus level, mood, urge intensity, confidence, productivity, creativity, and energy levels. So, and sleep patterns, excuse me, and sleep patterns, because this is another interesting data set to have is you can clearly see that the better the sleep was, the less the urges were for this individual throughout the entirety of the 30-day tracking. And these red bars are relapses. Okay. So you can see that this individual, the more creative they were, the less urges they had. Okay, well, that's very interesting because that's essentially sexual transmutation, right? That's what that is. And this is something that in the semen retention community, it's talked a lot about. It's talked a lot about when it comes to how people feel more creative when they're retaining their semen. And there's all these different, combinations of how they can build their finances or their life in general. Like everything magical starts to happen. Well, this is why. It's because there's less urges and more creativity. And this is exactly why they want you watching corn, because if you watch corn, well, then your urges are going to be higher, and your creativity, bam, takes a hit. But as soon as you're not, watch the creativity go up and the focus level improve steadily overall, the more that, or the less that there's an urge intensity. So that's very interesting nonetheless. But I think what's most significant about this individual specifically is that it's clear that the more sleep this individual gets, generally, like out of all these 30 days that they were tracking, 90% of the time when they had better sleep, they had less urges and their creativity was higher, focus level was higher overall, and sustainably so. The only part is like these 3 days here. These 3 days here are kind of an anomaly for this individual as well. I guess it's not like necessarily an anomaly. It's just something to kind of consider as part of like these patterns, because I would like to do a semen retention study where we do it for like 90 days or so to really get some solid results to see what the long-term effects are. 30 days was really the starting out point. Okay. And we still have enough data though to suggest that it's very obvious that when your sleep quality is better and when you're not succumbed to urges, your life starts to blossom. like that's pretty clear across the board. So now we get into subject 10. Now, subject 10 was myself, actually, because I wanted to be tracking this as well. And this is something that also you can see in myself where, because these bars here in the back are the sleep volume and quality, you can see that I had a couple spikes of urges in certain days. And right here was when I got less sleep quality. And here, this day, my focus level on this day, it kind of dropped significantly for one day simply because I just really was wiped out. For me personally, I was just wiped out. It didn't have anything really to do with semen retention. It didn't really have anything to do with urges, even though there were urges that were higher, here more than other days that I had, because the urges here were 4 and a 4. But in between that, I had that really low focus day where I basically just was like a couch potato because I just had worked significantly. Like you can see, my creativity levels are pretty high, generally speaking, as much as possible, as often as possible. But I did take a dip right when my urges started to increase. As soon as my urges started to increase for a couple of days there, my creativity took a dip. And it's the same thing here. When my creativity took a dip, it was always my urges increased. This is what we saw in subject 10, and we see this across these 10 subjects with focus and energy levels specifically. Now, of course, because in subject 9 and subject 10, we are tracking the psychological and emotional, as well as the physiological and biological and cognitive and behavioral uh, metrics, as well as the core, of course. Uh, we have to see this just simply for what it is and recognize like these anomalies that we see in these subjects, we're not always sure like why they're there, right? Like it could be something like, for example, if you see this and it's not really explainable, right? Because I got pretty good sleep and my urges were a little higher, sure, the previous day, but it, considering the other data, it shouldn't have been enough to significantly drop that much. But granted, of course, like this is the background story behind certain data. So this is kind of the uh, the salt that we have to place in this to really accept. Like we're not going to really know everything that what's going on behind the individual's psyche, but we can track the data to the best of our ability to see what it suggests. And still, even though there's like, a couple of anomalies in certain subjects, it doesn't uh, decrease the value and the consistency of the data across all other subjects. So we can see here also this was my discipline rating and my social awareness and distractions. So everything as far as uh, discipline and social awareness, obviously it was relatively stable, and because I'm the man in this study that is um, above the 1400 days mark, because at the time that we started this study, I first began to move into my 4-year mark, and then I hit my 4-year mark during the actual case study. So that's probably it was probably around like, yeah, it was about day 20 or 21 or so of the case study in which I hit my 4-year mark. So very, very interesting data, which comes to our conclusion of this abstract and this white case study, right? Because we want to ensure that, okay, well, now that we have the results, well, what can we conclude? Well, day 0 to 90 consecutive day window is the internal system recovery phase. Okay. So for the subjects between 0 to 90 consecutive day windows, the data reveals a quote unquote volatility state where biological rhythms are highly sensitive and psychological stability is in a state of active recalibration. So you can see here, this is the collective. This is the average energy level, the average productivity, the average urge intensity, and the sleep quality based off of the information that I have for the first 8 subjects. So you can clearly see that across the board, the less the urges, the more productive energy levels and focused people were. I mean, that is very clear. And we had a couple of these resets here that people had as well. So, or these resets or uh, relapses, right? And what's interesting is they were around the same days as each other. It's very interesting that how that happened. Uh, that's just kind of again, an anomaly. Maybe somebody will have a field day with the astrological side of that. But what we can clearly see here is that 365 days and beyond is the sovereign stability stage. So the relationship between creativity, urges, and focus is really important to take note here. Between the two subjects who were tracking their creativity, subject 9 and 10, myself, there's a psychological correspondence between sexual urges and creativity. Look at this. I mean, so this is, I called myself the sovereign transmuted stability study. And then we have the recovery / oscillating transmutation study for subject 9, because that person had several relapses, right? But you can clearly see when the urge intensity, which is these red bars, are higher. I mean, the data is very clear that the creativity drops significantly. And then as soon, because it dropped to about a 5 and then a 4 here. But then as soon as the urges are not as bad, they can go up to an 8 or even a 10. So that goes to show that there's about a 2 to 3 point difference between high urges and creativity levels. That's significant. So in both subjects, no matter the consecutive day count on SR, semen retention, whenever urges increased, focus and creativity would either decrease or stagnate on the day of increased urges or shortly afterward. So this suggests that the residual side effects to sexual urges, in the sense that sexual urges have a cognitive tax. In the recovery subject, the neural pathways for the discipline are still being built, so the cognitive tax is greater when urges happen. This is why we see a sharp drop in focus and creativity on really high urge days for all different subjects, not just the people that track creativity. So in the sovereign subject, even the urge breaks were automated. A spike in the urges, which was me, by the way, the sovereign subject, a spike in the urges still correlates with a stagnation in focus. This suggests that even for the well-seasoned retainer, the presence of the urge can create a background noise that prevents focus from hitting a perfect 10. So this is the key takeaway based off of this study, is that semen retention is not a goal. It is a vessel that can provide internal stability and a sovereign, regulated internal system. So, with all that being said, I hope that this was useful and insightful for you. In fact, I am positive this is useful and insightful for the people that have been on this, on this journey. They've already seen their own tracking. They've already seen what they're doing in their own life. This is next level stuff. This is like, we are real pioneers of the spiritual domain and the psychological domain right now. I made it my aim years ago when I first started. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew that I was going to revolutionize psychology and spirituality. And here we are today on the Semen Retention Sunday episode here on the Regal Change account, doing that. Now, I didn't know this was how it was going to be, but this is how it's going to be, apparently. I'm just doing this because this is who I am, and this is what I was born to do. For some reason, that remains to be seen. However, I know for a fact that we can conclude that just based on this data, just this small sample size, semen retention has profound psychological and spiritual benefits that are not to be underestimated. And no longer, I don't want to hear any more pseudoscience. Semen retention is pseudoscience. coming from all of these ignorant people, because we have the data points, we have the information, we have the samples, we have the subjects, we have the tracking, we have the process, we have a system to help us get out of systems. So, with all that being said, be blessed, stay blessed, and peace be with you. Until next time.